Red shift here, doing my part to shift perceptions out of the pink and into the red. MGTOW men are ridiculous. They are excusing their cowardice, their immorality, and their sexual hedonism, their promiscuity, and their dependence on feminism in order to get that free sex. They're excusing all of that bad behavior, all their immorality and cowardice, on the basis of legal dangers and misandric laws. But look at the Muslims in Europe. They form no-go zones. The cops don't even enter those areas. The cops are too scared to go into those areas. So the solution is simple. The solution is not to go MGTOW. The solution is to ally yourselves with the Muslims and go live in Muslim no-go zones. Then when you're living in a no-go zone, a Muslim no-go zone, you'll be able to marry and force your wife to be faithful, obedient, submissive, respectful, and quiet. And if she doesn't behave that way when you're living in the no-go zone, you just treat her the way the Muslims treat their wives. And when their wives misbehave, and thereby you'll be able to get your wife to be well behaved. And you'll be able to get away with treating her like that when she misbehaves because the Muslims make their own laws in their no-go zones, right? They are the law. Sharia is the law in a Muslim no-go zone, not the law of the country they're living in, right? They don't have to recognize the authority of the government because the government basically has no authority there because the government is unable to enforce its authority by way of cops using violence because the cops are too scared to enter the no-go zones. It's really simple. And it shows with stark clarity just how important courage is. Courage and morality are all you need. Intelligence is important, but in order to get freedom back, you don't even need intelligence. All you need is courage and morality. Courage, morality, and large numbers are a great substitute for intelligence. And you don't even need a majority. It's not like you need to get 51% of the population before you can do this, because, separation and cowardice are weakness. So 100 highly united, highly courageous people who are highly moral and are all living together, these 100 people are way more powerful than 1,000, probably more powerful than 10,000 people outside of that little area, like that little commune or whatever, because the people outside are cowardly and they're disunited and they're all selfish and fighting each other and they're all subservient to the government. So, but they're not willing to fight on the government side and risk their lives either. So it's not like they're actually allies of the government in terms of if the government tried to get them to fight the commune, they wouldn't. So when I say large numbers, you need a significant amount of numbers, maybe a few thousand people or a few tens of thousands, but you don't need anywhere near a majority of the population of a country before you can completely form a massive no-go zone and basically have your own country already at that point. Courage, morality, and large numbers are a great substitute for intelligence in terms of getting freedom back. Intelligence is only necessary in terms of, you need intelligence to push technology forward so that humanity can keep evolving. So in that sense, yes, intelligence is necessary. But other than that, it really is not necessary, especially not for getting freedom back. Because a lot of it, now you may say, oh, well, you need intelligence to be able to survive in this complicated technological world and all that. But not really, because, a lot of what makes surviving today hard is the tyranny, the massive taxation, the massive decrease in freedom. They don't let you just set up a shop on the side of the road and sell whatever you want there. No, you got to have a corporation and you got to, follow all these complicated laws. And if you don't, then you're going to jail and stuff. And you got to be able to afford an army of lawyers to, keep your company, in compliance with the law. Peter Schiff says he spends $1 million or something, I think $1 million or $2 million a year. I think it might have been $1 million a year on lawyers. Not even though he's breaking the law. He's not even breaking the law. He just has to spend $1 million on lawyers a year just to make sure he stays in compliance with the law. He said he could never start a company like that today. It's just, this is insanity. So, so without all the tyranny, you can even be dumb and survive quite easily. You can set up a little company without any kind of corporate bullshit, without needing a lawyer or anything, and just sell whatever you want. I mean, people do it in poor countries all the time. You go over there, they have the little stands and they're selling stuff. It's not this corporate, super lockdown bullshit like it is in the US, So if you just simplify everything, which you could easily do in a no-go zone when the government no longer has any authority in that no-go zone, because no-go zone being, keeping the cops out. When they are making their own laws, they can make everything super simple. And when everything is super simple and super free and everybody's highly moral, You can have a society, even with low IQ people, that is totally functional, way more functional than a society outside of it, which is immoral and cowardly and tyrannically enslaved and has high IQs, though, because of like being white or something. Right? Like a low IQ populace can survive just as well as a high IQ populace if they're free and moral and stuff, and they have courage. So this is how it is. Like I said, technology is only necessary for pushing technology forward. But without the morality and the courage to use exsanguinating force against oppression, or to at least keep it out, keep oppression out, like keep the cops out, then the only thing that intelligence and technological progress can accomplish without morality and courage is the destruction of the environment, the enslaving of people, the wasting of the planet's resources like oil, and ultimately the extinction of humanity. Imagine how bad the catastrophe is going to be once we're genetically engineering everyone. If the elites are still in charge at that point, their tyrannical desire for control and their foolishness and short-sightedness will lead to a genetic disaster that could easily make humanity go extinct. I mean, government creating viruses is bad enough. They're already doing that today. That could already bring our extinction. One of those viruses could get out. They might not have a cure for it. It could, evolve and mutate and bring about the destruction of all life on the planet. That could absolutely happen on accident because our government creates viruses and stuff in those genetic engineering labs and stuff they have. The government is totally insane and totally evil. And so in the future, even further, like 100 years from now, when they're screwing about with human DNA and choosing who gets what genes and all that kind of thing, they'll probably be so stupid that they breed us into a state of not being genetically diverse enough, and then humanity will go extinct, either from some plague that we don't have enough genetic diversity so that we don't have anybody survive, or because, we will need to have more diversity for whatever reason, and we'll need to, have that, but we won't have it. So we'll have already, gone down a dead end that we can't get out of, and then we'll go extinct, right? So intelligence does not remove the necessity for morality and courage, because if you don't have morality, intelligence just uses its power to destroy everything, But you need to understand that when it comes to getting freedom back, morality and courage do remove the necessity for intelligence. And if you don't have courage, then you can somewhat substitute intelligence for courage, but this requires a high IQ. And yet people cannot raise their IQs on their own. You're born with the IQ you're born with. You can only raise the IQs of your kids, right? And only by either marrying a woman smarter than yourself or having smart, using sperm bank sperm to have some kids that aren't yours, and then exchange those with a guy who did the same thing, and then his sperm bank sperm kids marry your biological kids, and then they have kids, and then you've increased the IQ of your grandkids. And yet to do a breeding program with sperm bank sperm kids, you need to live in a commune, and to have a functional commune, you'd have to be highly moral. And so morality is important, even though you can somewhat substitute intelligence for courage. But even to form a commune, I think, takes some courage, right? Especially if you're going to be, breaking the law or something. But you can't substitute intelligence for courage without cohesiveness, right? Without collectivization, without joining together with like-minded people. So you still need to either form a commune or go live in a Muslim no-go zone. Unlike today's Christians, Muslims have morality and courage. Christians used to have morality and courage just back as early as the 1940s, 50s, 60s. Christians still had a lot of courage and a lot of morality, but today's Christians, they have hardly any morality and hardly any courage. And this whole rapture bullshit, this whole rapture theology makes them think that they don't even need to have courage anymore because the end is coming, so why bother overthrowing the government, right? So Christians, their theology is now working against them and making them less courageous. And they're less moral because of all the evil propaganda on TV, right? Unlike today's Christians, Muslims have morality and courage still. And they don't have huge smarts like white people do, but whites are now immoral, cowardly, foolish, degenerate, weak, hedonistic, and short-sighted. And so it is definitely the case that Muslims are a far better ally for virtuous, courageous, freedom-loving whites. Now, there's not a whole lot of whites like that left, but the ones that do exist need to realize that Muslims are their true allies. Sure, Islam is not anarcho-capitalism, but it's a hell of a lot better than what we have now. I'd much rather live in an Islamic caliphate than live under this miscegenation-promoting, pegging-promoting, homosexuality-promoting, drug-dealing, fiat currency-using, overtaxing, satanic, Illuminati-run empire that we live in now. An Islamic caliphate would be infinitely better than what we're under now. At least an Islamic caliphate would promote virtue, would outlaw adultery, would outlaw homosexuality, would outlaw pegging, etc., and would use honest money and would not traffic drugs like CIA does. Better to pretend to be a Muslim and live among Muslims and get the benefits that come from living in an area that keeps out the cops. And unlike a ghetto no-go zone, like in America, like in some, densely populated cities, there's these ghettos that, the gangs are so powerful in those areas that they keep the cops out. Those are no-go zones too. But those no-go zones are completely different because they're run on, drug money and violence, and they're not run on morality, right? But an Islamic no-go zone is totally different. It's run on morality and sanity, and it only uses violence to keep out cops and to, keep out violations of Sharia law. So as long as you follow Sharia law, then, there's not like rampant violence in an Islamic no-go zone, unlike in a ghetto no-go zone, which there still is rampant violence. Because there's like warring gangs and stuff. It's not just one gang. It's got, there's multiple gangs and they're all fighting each other, right? So, Islamic no-go zones are totally different than like, ghetto gang-run no-go zones in the U.S., right? So it's totally different. It's not like they're killing each other over territory for selling more drugs in Islamic no-go zones, Think of the benefits of living in an Islamic no-go zone and pretending to be Muslim. You'd be around virtuous people. They keep out the cops for you so you can discipline your wife and force her to behave, force her to not cheat on you and not divorce you as long as you're faithful. You can raise your kids however you want without having to worry about CPS taking away your kids if you parent in a way that CPS considers abusive, like if you raise your sons to be very strong, aggressive, masculine, defiant, and moral. If you live in a Muslim no-go zone, you'd be able to exsanguinate your wife if she cheats on you. And that's just. Any woman whose man cheats on her, she should be able to kill him. And any man who cheats on his wife should be killed. And any woman who cheats on her husband should be killed. That's fair, right? So, you should be able to exsanguinate your wife if she cheats on you. But, it would be very unlikely, she would be very unlikely to cheat on you if she lived in a no-go zone with you, because all around her would be modest, quiet, hardworking, faithful, honest, compassionate, devoted, loyal Muslim women. Right? So your wife would be greatly influenced for the better by living in a Muslim no-go zone around all these women of high moral character, right? It would cause your wife to become more virtuous, as opposed to your wife becoming a worse person because of living in the corrupt society of today's America. She would also have a sense of community and would not just be more virtuous, but would also be much happier due to the sense of community and the companionship that your wife would feel with those virtuous women around her in the no-go zone in which your wife would live with you. Your wife would do the kinds of things that Muslim women do. She would raise kids and spend some time with other women, and it'd be very satisfying because it's a satisfying thing to hang out with other virtuous people if you yourself are a virtuous person, right? Your wife would quickly convert and be happy to consider herself a Muslim. And even if she knows that you, her husband, are just pretending to be a Muslim, she'd be okay with that too, because even when a woman converts to a religion, she doesn't really become that religion. She just kind of adopts it for as long as it works for her. And as long as the society around your wife and you is stable, happy, peaceful, and virtuous, because of everybody else being that way, then she'll consider herself to be that religion indefinitely, while not caring that you're only pretending to be that religion. And she probably won't even care if you teach your kids to be crypto-Muslims as well, that is, pretend Muslims, as opposed to teaching them to be actual Muslims, right? So since your wife is only sort of a Muslim, she won't be worried about her kids' souls if they don't convert to Islam because of instead being taught by you to be crypto-Muslims, by you, their father. Right? All your wife is going to care about is that everybody's happy and healthy and prosperous, which you would be because of the greater degree of own group preference in a Muslim no-go zone, as well as the greater level of virtue and the much greater freedom because of being free of government tyranny, because of the no-go zone keeping the cops out so that the no-go zone can create its own laws and does not have to recognize the laws of the government because the government can't enforce its laws on that no-go zone because it's afraid to send cops into that no-go zone. MGTOW men, Christian men, agnostic men, and materialist men who are all very red-pilled, as well as anarcho-capitalist men and libertarian men, all these types of men should be allying themselves with Muslims and should also be becoming crypto-Muslims and moving into Muslim no-go zones, or forming their own no-go zones in the U.S. Muslims set a good example. They show us the power that you can have when you have the courage to use physical force against tyranny. Muslims show us the power of own group preference, the power of morality, and the power of the cohesiveness that morality enables. We need to follow their example and ally ourselves with them because the tyranny that a person experiences under Islam is way less than the tyranny that we are already experiencing in America under this evil, evil, evil government that has been evil for, let's call it, 70 years. I mean, the government, the U.S. government has been so evil for so long, it's unimaginable, and it's just getting worse and worse and worse and worse. I mean, the MK Ultra program is pure evil, and they did that back in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. So imagine how much worse it is now in the government behind the scenes that we don't even know about. You know. I hope you understand this video because it makes a profound point that I have a hard time explicating with sufficient articulation and cogency. And that point is that if the Muslims can do it, which they already have, then we can do it. And therefore, there is no excuse for not either joining Muslim no-go zones or forming our own no-go zones. We can do it, and therefore we have to do it, because if we don't, the tyranny will only get much, much, much worse. Unimaginably worse. All you need is courage. All you need is the courage to use force against your oppressors, like the founding fathers did, and kind of like the Muslims are doing in Europe to keep the cops out. All you have to do is join together with like-minded people and use force to keep the cops out. And they don't even have to be like-minded in terms of everything, just basic morality and basic, appreciation of freedom and basic courage. The courage to keep the cops out, the common sense to not believe in the cops and not believe in the government, or at least not believe in the government as it currently exists. You could even be a statist, like a libertarian, and still join together with anarcho-capitalists and Muslims and Christians in keeping the cops out, because you see that, the government we have today is nothing like what the ideal government that I want it to be is, and what could be, and what we used to have in America. All these people could easily join together. Libertarians, anarcho-capitalists, Buddhists, Christians, agnostics, all these people could join together and keep the cops out. Easy, right? All you gotta do is join together with people that are somewhat like-minded and use force to keep the cops out. That's it. Imagine if the Branch Davidian compound in Waco had just been a mere 10,000 people. The government never would have dared go against it. Imagine if MGTOWs, libertarians, ANCAPs, Christians, and virtuous atheists, and agnostics, and some Buddhists and other people who value freedom and virtue. Imagine if they all got together and formed a no-go zone in one state in the U.S., like, a few 100,000 or 1 million or 2 million people all living in the same place. A place which drives out everyone that is opposed to keeping drives out everyone that, believes in cops. So, the only people living in this area are people who believe in driving the cops out and keeping the cops out, so that there's no cops in that area. So that, the only people left in that area of land are people who believe in keeping the cops out and having freedom and being virtuous, and people making their own laws and acting how they see fit, but everybody believes in, freedom and morality. Imagine, the government would never go against a no-go zone populated by hundreds of thousands or 1 million or 2 million people. It'd be too big of a PR disaster, And we have the Second Amendment. All those people could be armed with handguns and AR-15s every single day, everywhere they go, especially once they keep the cops out. Once they get the cops out, they can just walk around with guns all the time, and then everybody is always armed. And then if the government ever tries to come in, they could easily drive the government out, and they're not going to be unprepared because they're always carrying a gun around, right? Like, the government would have to try to send in the military or the cops, and then the people of that area would be numerous enough to easily wipe out the cops or the military. What, is the U.S. Army going to send in the entire U.S. Army, take out all the military out of every base in the whole world and send it against this one little no-go zone in America? Because there's 500,000 people in this no-go zone that are all willing to die to keep the government out, and they're, killing one per one. Every time, the cops or the military that's sent in kill one of the people in the no-go zone, one of the people in the no-go zone manages to exsanguinate a cop or a military. Imagine that. Like, they would have to have more people in the military or the cops sent into that area to take that area than there are people in that area. And you really think they're going to send 500,000 soldiers and or cops into this one little no-go zone to try to take it back? I don't think so. The U.S. government, it would set a terrible precedent for the U.S. government, because everybody would see when the U.S. government would have a super hard time taking the area. Then everyone would realize, holy shit, the U.S. government's basically powerless. We could do this too. And then everybody else would start doing it in the U.S. too. And then the U.S. government would lose complete control. The U.S. government would realize that the only thing it can do is just leave this little no-go zone alone and pretend like it doesn't exist. Because there'd just be too much trouble to take it down, and it would set a terrible precedent once it was unable to take it down. You see, and then everybody else would start walking away from the U.S. government, forming communes and no-go zones as well. So the U.S. government would totally leave the no-go zone alone, I'd never be able to succeed to taking them down, especially if the area was using its most beautiful and articulate women to make YouTube channels, making the government look terrible for attacking that no-go zone, that free place in America, and especially if that no-go zone were multicultural, were of various races and various religions and various political philosophies. but obviously no liberals or centrists or anybody who believes in the government or the cops. And if that area were, using the Muslims and the women and the blacks and Latinos in that no-go zone as moral Teflon to make the government look terrible for attacking that no-go zone. Imagine it. Like, we could easily do this. People just need to see that this is true and then start advocating for it and then actually do it. The Muslims, with their not very abundant smarts, did it, so we should be able to easily do it. Unless you want to admit that we are pussies, that we are cowards, and that that's why we can't do it, because of Muslims having genes for courage and us whites having genes for cowardice. But I say that no man is so cowardly that he can't do this if he has the assistance of a lot of other like-minded men. So there's little or no excuse to not either form your own commune, which hopefully will grow in prosperity and in land and in population due to lots of breeding in the commune and will thus eventually become a no-go zone all in its own, or go live in a Muslim no-go zone for, so that you can, get this, right? There's little or no excuse for not doing one of these two things, or for at least advocating that we do this, because maybe you can't do it until other people help you do it. But then you should at least be making videos on this and advocating for it and trying to grow a channel so that you can convince as many people to do this as humanly possible so that we can get more men trying to do it. You need to consider men of courage and morality like Muslims to be your allies. Men of courage and morality are your allies. Men who are not courageous or not moral are not your allies. Promiscuous MGTOW men are not moral and are thus not your allies. Most MGTOW men are cowardly and have no interest in overthrowing this tyrannical government or doing what it takes to get back freedom, and thus are not your allies. The vast, vast majority of Christians these days are cowards and thus are not your allies. A huge percentage of Christians are not anywhere near as moral as they should be, and they're not anywhere near as moral as Christians of 100 years ago used to be. And thus, they're not your allies for that reason either. Not just because the Christians are cowardly, but because they're not moral either. Muslims are your allies, but MGTOW men, statists, and most Christians are not your allies. Ally yourself with people on the basis of courage, morality, and how much they believe in freedom, even if that means allying yourself with people of other religions and other races. Peace.